My name is Anthony Breznican. I'm a writer at Entertainment Weekly. I'm also it's always weird to introduce yourself. Like, hello, get to know me.
Do you want me to introduce you?
Yeah, James Dashner is my hype man. He's gonna introduce me.
Anthony Breznican is the most amazing man on the planet. He
Wow.
He's covered the Oscars and all kinds of movie stuff for Entertainment Weekly for years and years. And he is also an author of a really awesome YA book that I enjoyed very much. And he is just a good guy. So give him a big round of applause.
Wow. Thank you, James. James, would you mind saying that again with just a little more emphasis while I record it?
Maybe later.
Thank you, James. I'm also a contributor to this book, Last Night, A Superhero Saved My Life, which Scott Westerfeld is also in. Stories of comic book characters that had a deep impact on people's real lives. So I hope you'll maybe give that a look if you're interested in such things. But today we are talking with these phenomenal authors. It's kind of a page-to-screen panel, very wide open topic that we can cover a lot of interesting things on. It's called I Read It Before and After It Was a Movie. And I kind of love the name of the panel. I didn't come up with it because well, when I was a kid, I'd go to see a movie I loved, and I always went out to buy the book afterward if I hadn't already read it. And that led me to some great novels that existed before the movie. It led me to actually some fun novelizations that were, adaptations of Tim Burton's Batman and
Raiders of the Lost Ark. I read that.
Really? I've never read that one.
Yeah.
I think Ghostbusters 2 was okay. As a book form, it suffered from a lack of Bobby Brown music. But it was pretty good. But I write about movies for Entertainment Weekly, and but my heart is in books. That's why I became a writer. So I'm very happy to be here with you guys today. And we have such esteemed panelists. I'm gonna try not to give them short shrift, but we could be here all for the full hour reading their credentials. So I'm gonna begin with Melissa De La Cruz. She's the author of The Isle of the Lost and Return to the Isle of the Lost, prequels to Disney Channel's Descendants. She also wrote the Blue Blood series of novels and the Beauchamp family series, which became The Witches of East End on television. Let's hear it for her. We've also got Ransom Riggs. He's the author of Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, which is headed to the screen by way of a young man named Tim Burton. He also wrote Hollow City and Library of Souls. His upcoming Legends and Fairy Tale collection, Tales of the Peculiar, comes out on September 3rd, Loop Day. Yep. James Dashner, I'm not really sure who this guy is. I think he just kind of came in here. He's the author of The Maze Runner and the upcoming prequel, The Fever Code. It's out in September as well. He also penned The Eye of Mines and the Mortality Doctrine series that came from that. Third film in the Maze Runner series, The Death Cure, is now slated for 2018. And let's hear it for James. He's also just a really nice guy, believe it or not. Scott Westerfeld is the author of Zeros and its sequel, Swarm, about superheroes who aren't so much heroes, but get there. They were co-written with fellow scribes Margot Lanigan and Deborah Biancotti. He's also the author of the Leviathan series and Uglies. Let's hear it for Scott. We also have Mr. Ben H. Winters. His new book is Underground Airlines, which imagines a United States in the present day where slavery was never fully abolished. He's also the author of The Last Policeman trilogy, which includes Countdown City and World of Trouble. Also wrote Android Karenina and Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters. Let's hear it for Ben. Peter David, again, we'll spend the full hour just on Peter here. He's the co-creator of the Star Trek New Frontier series. He's written scores and scores of books, including Battlestar Galactica, Sagittarius is Bleeding, also Halo, Hunters in the Dark. He's a renowned comic book scribe. Spent 12 years on The Incredible Hulk, isn't that right?
That's correct.
Wow. He's hulking out. Don't make him angry.
You wouldn't like him.
You wouldn't like him. You'd like him. He's just fine when he's angry. Give him a Snickers. He's cool. He also worked on Spider-Man, Supergirl. Again, I think we could speed this up just by announcing the characters you haven't written. He's also, speaking of novelizations, I was really thrilled to see this. I'm going to have to find this book. You wrote The Rocketeer, the novelization of The Rocketeer. Isn't that badass?
Yeah.
Batman
I
Forever
wrote-
and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films. He also penned his own novels, Tigerheart. Oh, I'm sorry. Say what you...
Go ahead.
Oh, he also wrote Tigerheart and Darkness of the Light, Peter David. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Peter. What were you trying to say?
Oh, no, I was actually going to. I wrote 2 adaptations of the Rocketeer movie. The one was a novelization. The other was a comic book adaptation. Oh. So I really know that freaking movie.
So, what do you know? What the count? How many total books you've written?
Over 100.
Wow.
Nice. Peter making everybody feel bad about themselves right at the start of the panel. Jeez. All right, I want to start with just a general question that each of you can answer on your own. And I want to hear about a book or a movie or some combination that you discovered when you were young. Either a film that led you to a book, vice versa, a novelization, something you read that had a connection to the screen in some way that influenced the storyteller you became. Start with...
So I mean, I read the very first Star Wars novelization. Yay. And of course, I read it after the movie. But I actually saw Star Wars in cinema because I'm old, and like first time around, 1977.
Was that Alan Dean Foster?
And yes, it was. Yeah. And what was cool is what I realized is, and it really shaped me in a weird way toward books and toward being a writer, because in that novelization, you found out the backstory of like those pilots at the end, like stay on target guy, who just dies. Yeah. But in the novelization, you know him, like he's a dude and he came from this planet and his mom didn't like his something and never let him play with blah blah, and that's why he says stay on target all the time. And there was this depth of characterization and this mystery of and I was like, and you could never do that in a movie. And that sort of drew me to the deeper world of books. And it was, and you think of a novelization as being, a thing that is a knockoff of the movie or whatever. But of course, what it shows is how much deeper books can be and how much more sort of awesome the world building can be and how much and the affordances of the novel to get inside people's head is kind of a beautiful thing. And so a novelization is where I came to that realization, and which shaped all my ideas about point of view and all the stuff that I do when I novelize from scratch.
I still have the hardback of that, and it says it's by George Lucas on the cover.
I read that one too.
But I know that Alan Dean Foster.
Alan Dean Foster is still writing them. He wrote the Force Awakens novelization as well.
Right.
Yeah. Still going, 40 years. Mm-hmm. So James, was there an adaptation or a novelization or a book to film that got under your skin or into your head?
Well, earlier I alluded to Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
And it said it was by Steven Spielberg, but I don't know who actually wrote it. But it was extremely similar to what Scott just said. I mean, I was 7 or 8, and I was reading, Super Fudge and that kind of stuff. But, Raiders of the Lost Ark just changed my life, that movie. It was so amazing. And so I didn't actually run to the bookstore, but I'm sure my mom did. And she bought me that book, and I actually still have that too. And it was just so cool to have visualized this thing as a movie and then see it in the written word. And I have no doubt that impacted my life, because I think cinematically when I write, and the line between books and movies for me is very blurry.
How about you, Melissa?
It's so funny. I'm so glad we're talking about novelizations, because one of my favorite series of books is the Robotech novelizations. And I don't know if anybody remembers those. They were Japanese. I know. It's like, oh, I'm so sad. I was on the Surfliner.
Dead silence.
If you're gonna name drop the Robotech novelizations, I think Comic-Con is a safe place.
I know. Come on. I was on the Surfliner, and these young writers behind me, they write for the Magicians, and they were talking about Stranger Things, and one of them said, "It's just so great because it's for us who missed the '80s," and I was like, God, I'm so old. It's like, I lived through that. But yeah, so it was a Japanese cartoon, about robots and heroes. And the novelizations were these wonderful, weird sci-fi space operas. And it just really opened up the world, and I was just like, oh my God, books are amazing, you know, for all the reasons everybody said, because it makes the world bigger, and you get to know the characters so much more. So I love those books, and apparently they were written by a lot of different people. So it was like Jack Gansey is an Air Force pilot, a waitress, It was, anyway, I love those. Totally geeking out here.
How about you, Ben?
A very different answer. Not really when I was young. When I was younger than I am now, I read Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. And the thing about that book, which is extraordinary, and you realize that when you see the movie, which everyone rightfully lauds as being like this incredibly creepy and well-imagined movie, it is a direct adaptation to that book. Like, it is chapter by chapter, and you realize that what is so frightening about the movie, which is that it's all from her claustrophobic point of view, is all what Ira Levin did in the novel. And so reading that and realizing how much Polanski had taken from the book, I was like, oh, this is why books are awesome. You can do this in a book. And it totally influenced, I wrote a horror novel called Bedbugs, which was like an almost embarrassing homage to Rosemary's Baby when I realized what he was doing and how he did it. It's amazing.
Did you saw Rosemary's Baby, the film first, and then read the book?
Yeah. I knew the film. And then later on, I read the book. I was like, "Oh, wow, it's incredible." See, you got to read that book; it's so good.
See, I discovered Stephen King because nobody would take a 12-year-old me to see Pet Sematary, but my grandmother was like, I'll encourage you to read and expand your mind by buying you this paperback." And I was like, "Oh, come on, this sucks." But it made me want to be a writer. But what he could do with words. I couldn't make a film at 12, but I could write a little scary short story. Not a good one.
Oh, I totally should have given the Stephen King answer. That was my real answer.
We'll come back to you.
Too late, Dashner.
I'll shut up, Ransom. Go ahead.
Going to do it.
I'm going to take that.
You already stole my answer.
Snatch it right from your jaws. I actually had a sort of a weirdly opposite experience because I grew up, my mom was not a movie fan, and I didn't have a lot of, we didn't go to the movies, but we had a big library of books, so I was always reading books. Didn't know a lot about movies, but I loved Stephen King as a kid. 12, 13, I remember whole afternoons, this is really embarrassing now, lying in my mom's waterbed, listening to Alice in Chains and reading It. That was me at age 12. That's cute. And I realized that they had made a lot of movies of his books, and so I went to the video store and I rented The Shining.
Big mistake.
At age
scary
13 or 14 or something. And I had this moment of I loved books. I was writing novellas and stuff and short stories, and I already knew books were awesome and that I wanted to write. But then I saw the movie of The Shining, and I was like, whoa, this does things books can't do. I want to do that too. So I got totally distracted for 20 years, and I was like, I want to write books and make movies. I don't know which. And so I kind of got, back to books eventually, but it's interesting that books led me to movies via that one, which is a really, I think, controversial adaptation because, King doesn't like it, and it's really different, and, Stanley Kubrick just went off sort of, on his own thing and did, but such an interesting case study.
King may come around. It's
you think so?
No.
I don't think so.
I mean, it's a true adaptation. I feel like it's actually fairly faithful to the book. It's just there were things you couldn't do with the book, and it's the director adds his vision or her vision to the story. So, but I don't know. I think it's like a great book and a great movie, even though they're not the same. I think movies and books are kind of like siblings sometimes. They look alike, they've got similar characteristics, but they have their own lives and their own existence.
Good analogy.
Is that good?
Pound it.
All right, thanks. I just live to impress James. Doesn't happen that often.
Get a room.
Peter, tell me about a book or a film or some combination that inspired you when you were younger, just starting out.
Well, first off, I know Steve King because I work on Dark Tower, so I'm going to tell him you all spoke very highly of him.
Nice, thanks.
There's any number of times that I read books based upon movies. MASH, Kramer versus Kramer, Oh God was a book. If we're talking about when I was young, then and that influenced me. Actually, I'd probably say the Tarzan movies. They showed up, I was in New York, they would show up on Channel 11 every so often, and Johnny Weissmuller was my first exposure to the character. And that prompted me to get the first book, which I was astounded to see was insanely different from the grunting He-Man that Weissmiller was. So that basically told me two things. Number one, characters can be very, very different from what you see in the books. And number two, the books are 90% of the time much better than the movies that are based upon them. And say what you will about Edgar Rice Burroughs, his prose was insanely purple. His stories were laced with coincidences that made no freaking sense at all. But the man knew how to tell a story in terms of constructing cliffhangers. I mean, because what he would do, he'd write a chapter, and the chapter would build to a cliffhanger, and you go to chapter 2, and suddenly he's telling a different story. He's off in another part of the story, and now you're getting caught up in chapter 2, and that ends on a cliffhanger, and you go to chapter 3, and it's continuing the cliffhanger from chapter 1, and you're going, but what happened in chapter 2? So, and that will pull you right through the freaking book. And that was fairly influential in the way that I have constructed much of my writing, in terms of that, keeping in mind that ultimately you want to have people turning the pages. And that was a very great lesson to learn when you're an aspiring young writer.
Now, you've spent a lot of time adapting stories, writing new stories that are based on characters who exist in other franchises, of course, in Star Trek and in other properties. What's that like compared to crafting your own tales where you are the boss completely and can do whatever you want, versus working with presumably a team? I assume it's different on every franchise or property that you work on, but can you give us some insight into what that's like, grabbing somebody else's toys and making up your own story with them?
It depends entirely upon the people who are in the approvals process. I'll give you a very specific, for instance. I wrote a Star Trek novel called Vendetta that I refer to as the Great Big Book of Borg. And if you look at any copy of Vendetta, there's a little disclaimer in the front. And it says something to the effect of, this book is entirely the creation of the author and does not in some ways match up with the Star Trek universe as created by Gene Roddenberry. That disclaimer was put in at the insistence of Paramount because they felt that Vendetta had something that flew in the face of Gene's Star Trek. What Vendetta had was a female Borg. And we were told, no, there's no such thing as a female Borg. This was before 7 of 9. I wrote it before the frickin' Borg Queen. So when you have people who are being, what's the word, dicks, about the approvals process, it can prove to be something of a challenge, because ultimately you're playing with other people's characters. That's one of the reasons that I love writing the New Frontier novels, because most of the characters in New Frontier are entirely of my creation. The rest are characters who showed up for 1 or 2 episodes of Next Generation and were never seen again. So Paramount doesn't give a damn what happens to any of them. And as a result, I can have them get married, I can have them get pregnant, I can kill them off, I can do whatever I want. That's why I've written over 20 books in the New Frontier series, because the characters have so much potential. The advantage to working in somebody else's universe is that you are part of a much greater tapestry than you are capable of producing entirely on your own.
Melissa, I want to ask you a similar question, since you've been most recently working on Descendants, and you started with a prequel to the movie. Mm-hmm. I presume they gave you the script and all that, but when you finished the book, had they started shooting, or was that well before they even got started? Because I'm wondering how, since you're working with the same characters, the performance of a script changes the characters in a lot of ways. So how did you figure out how to match it up but still tell a story that was close to your own heart?
Yeah, it was funny. I was listening to Peter about the approvals process. I mean, that's certainly something that when you're writing your own books, you don't have to worry about, all the sections of Disney giving you notes. The project was conceived together. So when I got the gig to write the books, we did have a script, but we weren't in production yet. So I pitched them a bunch of different ideas. A lot of them were turned down. And then finally, we agreed on a prequel. And what I always say about this project is that I'm given the entire Disney universe to play with, and this tiny little narrative plot where I can have my plot, because they have to match up with the movies, but not the Wicked World shorts. I mean, Descendants is animated shorts. There's a video game. It's just this huge world. So my book really does go with the movie. So that's what we're worried about. And it was cool. I got to go on set, and that's when it kind of came alive. Like, what does she look like? What are they like? The performances of the actors. So I was able to kind of take the script, go to the movie, and then kind of think about, what these characters are for me. And that's when, it was kind of like just the same gig as anything. I call them my adopted children. I had to kind of breathe life into them and give them, part of my soul too. Otherwise the book doesn't work. So it's a really interesting process every time. It's always like, oh, this is this job again. I got to get back into that. And while, there's Mal on the screen, the Mal in the books is just a little bit different from what we see, just because the books are, inherently going to be different. And I think what was great about it is everybody really loved it. They were like, oh, you took what Disney, there was a really real reverence for Disney in the books that maybe they can't really do in the movies that much. So the channel was very happy. So,
what's it like on the opposite end of that when it's your original creation, James and Ransom? You are the owners and creators of these characters, and then somebody else comes in to adapt them. And often the studios and filmmakers say, we're going to do our own thing there. But do you get a voice in the adaptation of your own work at all similar to the way Peter and Melissa just described the studios saying, well, we're going to give you approvals on all that stuff? Do you get like one or two voids, like veto this, or does that actually not exist whatsoever?
Well, I think that the situation depends a lot on who's making it, and if it happens to be a filmmaker you've idolized since you were 15, it's a lot easier to be like, great, do whatever you need to do. It's awesome, So that made me much more comfortable with the whole process than I think I would have been if it had been someone I've never heard of, and they were like, okay, we're gonna make these changes. And I'm sure if I had pitched a huge fit and threatened to blow up the universe and pulled out spent all of my credits, I could have gotten them to not do something. But I just trusted Tim and his vision, and I think he's done a great job, so I'm really happy. But I'm sure James had a different experience because every producer, every studio.
Sorry, just a second. Totally. Can you guys hear him okay, or is he a little faint? Would you mind just getting a little closer?
I can talk like this too.
It's terrifying.
So.
Sorry about that.
Sorry. I can
so
repeat
just
all
say that all over again.
Okay. So in the beginning, I was 0. First the earth cooled.
But did Tim have any thoughts or questions for you as he was putting together his version of the story?
No.
He's good, huh?
All right. We didn't really talk. He took the book and read it, and I talked to the studio, but it's interesting. I think it's a product of Tim having been in the industry so long and having had so much success, and now having clout, and probably being so sick of the bull that he gets from Hollywood. He can be like, I have my sort of island where I only have to talk to people I trust, and so I sort of talked to Tim via the studio at first, and then when the process was going, the movie was getting made, I was on set a lot, and we have a relationship. He's a great guy, and he's super nice, and but until you sort of get beyond this veil, you don't really talk to Tim.
Tell the truth, you have to call him Mr. Burton. I had a very different experience because my director, it was his first film. And so he was this, young, funny, hilarious, spastic, crazy guy, Wes Ball. And I felt like Fox was really, really good to me and always made me feel like I was a part of it. But I had absolutely no decision-making power whatsoever. They'd constantly ask me for my opinion on the script, and Wes would email me all the time with, does this jive with things that happen in later books and all this? But then they would just kind of pat me on the head and say, okay, now go play, we'll figure it out. But it was an extremely positive experience, and from what I can tell so far on Ransom's film, which just looks perfect to me, and my film, I think we are both incredibly lucky.
Yeah.
I have friends who've had movies made that were not so good, and not even the quality of the films, but just not a very positive experience. Mine has been completely positive, amazing from beginning to end, and it's not over yet. We have a third movie.
Well, tell us about that. I'm sure you guys would like to know more about the death cure because, as we all know, Dylan O'Brien had an awful accident on set. But he's coming back, and the date has just been pushed back, so it's now 2018. Can you give us an update on what you know of Dylan or what you can share about him, but also the movie?
Dylan is still recovering, but he's very close to recovery, I think. His, deservedly so, his family's very private about it and everything. But I know that he's been on the set of Teen Wolf, so that's positive. And but the other thing that happened is Kaya Scodelario, who plays Teresa, decided to have a baby.
So selfish.
Yeah, so she is with child, and we tried to work that into the script, but it just didn't. It was weird. So she's going to have her baby, and Dylan's going to keep recovering and finish Teen Wolf. And they hope to start filming very early next year. And the official release date is January 17th, 2018. So.
Good to hear. Yay. Let's hear it for that. Now, Scott, what has your experience been like with books being adapted? I know Uglies hasn't been adapted to a film yet, but the fans have not wasted any time in casting that movie.
Well, as many of you may know, Uglies is a book, set in a dystopia where people are all forced, or at least compelled by society's pressures to become beautiful on their 16th birthday. So it sends a message that lookism isn't important, and people's ideas and selves should not be valued depending on the way they look, which is, of course, exactly what Hollywood is all about. A lot of people don't know this, but under the Hollywood sign, there's another sign that says, "Welcome to Hollywood. We don't care what you look like. We love you no matter what." It's really small.
I think that
and it got blown up by Tim Dalton in the Rocketeer movie. So.
And I think there was an earthquake though, and the sign disappeared. But there's one guy in Hollywood who signs all the checks. And whenever they bring him it's been at many different studios. It's been at many different incarnations. There's been a feature film written and a pilot for a series written, and it goes to this one guy who signs all the checks, and he's like, "Wait a minute, you want to make a movie about ugly people?" And I think in some ways the ideology of Hollywood and the ideology of Uglies may be in some subtle disjunction. And that, which has been an interesting experience to have. And there's another funny thing where they don't, which is almost the reverse of that, where they don't believe Tally's motivation. She betrays her friend, leaves home, and betrays her friend to spy on her friend because she wants to be pretty. That's what the government holds over her. It's like, you will not have this surgery unless you spy on your friend and betray the smoke. And they're like, well, that's a terrible motivation. Could you change it so they threaten her with some underground work camp or something? So it's like every other dystopia? And I'm like, why did you buy this? If you don't believe that. Also, didn't 5 actresses die from plastic surgery last year in your town? So there's a so Uglies has this kind of weird relationship with Hollywood that I find fascinating in itself. It's its own very illuminating kind of process and kind of experience to have. And it's just like books are revealed by making movies out of them, they're also books are revealed by not making movies out of them. Like the way books don't get made into movies is in some ways its own kind of performance art. But much less lucrative for me.
It has been adapted into a graphic novel. So talk to me about that process, taking your story and telling new aspects of it in comic book form.
Yeah, well, that was really fun. And one of the things that I knew I wanted to do it in a graphic novel. And part of that was that I was writing something called Spill Zone, which is my own graphic novel. And I wrote about half of it and realized I don't know how to write graphic novels. So I decided to trick somebody into teaching me how to write graphic novels. So I had them hire someone else to do the Uglies adaptation. And I think my one really good contribution to that project was I said, make it look like manga. Because in manga, like the great thing about Uglies, the novel, is that you can imagine them as being the most beautiful people, like overwhelmingly beautiful. And whatever is in your head is beautiful can be on that page in a way that's never going to work with the movies, because they're going to have to just pick one kind of beauty. Mm-hmm. But manga has its own sort of codes for beauty, like people with little stars around them. Mm-hmm. Like someone's pretty in a manga because there's like these visual triggers that say this is the beautiful person. There's stars or like rainbows or like like pull focus, and like other people's eyes get really big, and having those codes to work with was in a way a much more interesting way of projecting beauty and thinking about beauty than doing a sort of more realistic or Western style comic where you had to say she's hot. So in a way I think maybe a graphic novel was a more effective way of doing it than a film. I mean, I think the same goes for if you write a book about a band. Like you can say this is an awesome band and this is great music, but if you make a movie about it, someone's got to find a real band, and at least 50% of the people are going to say that band sucks.
Yeah. So Ben,
Yes.
Underground Airlines has just been released, but you also have the Last Policeman series, and I wondered what the state of adaptation is, where the rights stand on those. Have you had any interest? Can you update us on whether we might see a different iteration of your stories on the screen, TV, big screen, or otherwise?
Underground Airlines has been optioned, and I'm writing it for TV. It's in this magical stage we call development, which is a magical place full of rainbows. And so it's in development. And I wrote a company called Legendary optioned it, and so I wrote a pilot, and they're working on attaching what they call in Hollywood elements of talent, which means human beings, and then to try to find a home for it. And it's complicated. It's a tricky process because the book is it's about institutional racism, and it's about our country's history of racialized violence, and it's about how the legacy of slavery still colors the way the institutions and the attitudes toward African Americans in ways that are really disfiguring to our democracy. And it's also a thriller, it's a mystery novel, but it's about these things that are morally fraught, and are the way, in my opinion, in my obviously biased opinion, the reason the novel works is because it has this moral force and these important, or at least important things to say underneath the thriller. And so in the process of trying to transform it, I am very conscious of making sure that moral force remains attached to the project. So that's where that is. And Last Policeman is we're working on it, basically. Yeah, it's been through the ringer a couple times with a couple different entities, and now we are working on it again.
I think we're in a great state of adaptation at the moment, because I feel like Hollywood has gotten over the idea that if you're going to make a TV adaptation of something, that it has to have 22 episodes and run for 7 seasons. That we've adopted the British model of maybe it can just be 2 seasons and 10 or 12 episodes each. So I'm curious about Underground Airlines and how it came to be a TV project as opposed to a movie, and whether that was something you pushed for, or whether that just happened and you said, good idea.
The interest that we had in it was from the TV side, basically. And so before I got really a chance to sit down and go and make a hard decision about what I thought, the interest was there from the TV side. And I think we have, in my opinion, which is probably, I don't know if it has any merit, but I think we have a better chance of making it not only good, but sort of powerful and important, you know, maintaining the values I was talking about on the TV side, I think. So, yeah.
So, in your book, I would guess, obviously because it's about race, that the races of the characters are important to maintain as you're telling the story. But in other stories that get adapted, I've been writing about the Dark Tower movie, and obviously I don't know how many of you guys have read those books, but right? But Roland the Gunslinger was always a white guy. Like he was described as having blue eyes. The illustrations, he always had that vaguely Clint Eastwood look about him. And then they cast Idris Elba in the role.
Woo!
Right?
The internet must have hated that.
I mean, he's very homely, so I don't know what they were thinking there. But I mean, I saw that and thought, yeah, he looks different than I pictured him, than King pictured him. I mean, King started writing those books before Idris Elba was born, believe it or not. And but I think it's absolutely incredible casting. For those of you whose characters are not necessarily locked down in terms of race, that race doesn't define who they are. How do you feel about other casting directors, filmmakers changing that element? And do you think that it automatically changes anything about the story, or are we at a stage now where there's a bit of color blindness and we can swap out characters that aren't necessarily about the topic of race?
Can I answer this one?
Sure,
because
go for it.
First of all, I'm such a Dark Tower fan, so I'm really, really excited that Peter is here, because I read all your comics on the Dark Tower. So,
Thank you.
and as somebody who is not Caucasian, reading all of these books, growing up in this American culture, the Idris Elba casting for me, was just like, why not? Like, of course he embodies all of Roland's, toughness, gentleness, hotness, So, I was just,
in that order?
Yeah, probably a little bit more reversed. But not only in the Dark Tower, casting somebody who's an African. British, I guess,
Not African
I
American.
can't say African American.
Yeah.
But casting a black actor in a role that is a Clint Eastwood white guy, Marlboro Man, I mean, it was just, I was so happy. And I just thought, I'm so glad we've come a long way, and then, yes, there are people who are angry about it, which I was just like, whatever, get woke, yeah. And then Hamilton, which all my YA friends, have been talking about. But I was like, I don't want to listen to the soundtrack. I don't want to know anything about it until I go see it, because I want to experience it live on stage.
September 9th, I'm seeing it.
Wow.
Yay! And when we went to see it, and I don't know, maybe some people don't know, but it's a story of the founding of America, told in rap and played by African American, Puerto Rican, Latino, Asian actors, and it's an amazing story. It's an amazing musical, the music. But what for me was so profound was to see this story, to see Thomas Jefferson played by brown people. I was sobbing after. I'm still like, I have chills to think that that story can be something that's our story too. I came to America as a 13-year-old immigrant from the Philippines, and I don't know, it's just weird. It was just profound to feel like that could be our story too, that Alexander Hamilton is our guy too, because you just feel a little bit outside of things, just a little bit. And I'm just so glad that I live now. Like, it is a wonderful time. We are so lucky to be alive right now, I get very passionate about Hamilton.
That was awesome.
You asked that.
Like the Battle Hymn of the Republic should have started playing while she was talking. That was very well said. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this topic, Peter?
I actually had a problem with Idris Elba as Roland. It has nothing to do with the actor. Perfectly good actor. Has nothing to do with the color of his skin. I really don't have a problem with that. it just screws up another character in the series. There's a character, part of his followers, his quartet, whose name is Odetta. And Odetta has an alternate personality named Detta Walker. And she is a classic angry black woman. Yep. And the reason she doesn't trust Roland and Eddie is that they're two white guys. Yep. Yep. So if Roland is now suddenly a black guy, Detta has, since everything she judges is on the basis of skin, has absolutely no reason to distrust Roland. So that effectively screws your character up. On the other hand, Stephen King has no problem with it. So I don't have a problem with it as long as he doesn't. But, you know, it's just a shame because Odetta and her alter ego was such a fun freaking character to read about and to write, because we just finished doing an adaptation of the part of the second book where Odetta's character shows up. So I'm really into that character. So when I find out Idris Elba, I'm going, oh, well, so much for Detta. And I guess that's really the only place where the skin color of the actor has an impact. And that is that if there is something about the character or something about the other character that directly conflicts with the color of the skin. And in this case, that's pretty much what happened.
Isn't it
now, now the thing is, if Detta's not in the Idris Elba movie, then it's really not the slightest bit of an issue. I suspect that she probably isn't.
She's not.
Okay, well, that simplifies it.
She's not in this version, but she may come in if there are sequels. But
right.
I think isn't there
so
a
they're
sign...
gonna, and if she does, they're just going to have to rethink her character, or since Detta is an alternate personality who's knucking futs anyway, her whole attitude may be, what did they do to you, brother, to make you, go over to their side? Mm-hmm. So, but you're just going to have to reinterpret her character based upon Idris Elba.
Maybe it's a sign of progress that the writers of the adaptation will have to come up with something else for her to be angry about.
Oh, yeah.
Than racism. Then, there's plenty to be mad about in the world. In the worlds.
Maybe he supports Donald Trump.
Maybe, yeah. Make Midworld great again.
God.
So I think we have about 15 minutes left, but I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions if you guys have some.
We actually have 10 minutes left. Because the guy with the 15-minute sign came by 5 minutes ago.
I didn't see him. I was riveted by it.
That was some quick math, Peter. Good job.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. That was loud.
Hi.
First off, Anthony, you are an excellent moderator because you asked a lot of the questions that I already had.
Thanks.
So
that's nice of you.
Yeah,
Very
I've been
nice.
on panels where the guy says, so what do you guys want to talk about? I mean,
excellent moderator.
I'm just glad I made it because I was coming from the hotel over there, and they have all these like Hall H lines that are going for miles, and they're like, you can't cross. It's like trying to cross a parade route. I gotta moderate. This thing's not gonna moderate itself. Okay, thank you. It's very nice of you.
So one of my questions is internet trolls. I know you guys get a lot of them. I want to hear some of your interesting stories about internet trolls and how you guys deal with them, or if you deal with them at all.
There was a guy once who wrote a negative review of one of my Star Trek novels, The Captain's Daughter. And I read it, and I kind of shrugged, and I went, okay, well, what are you going to do? Maybe you'll like the next one better. 6 days later, he started a new thread. Peter David doesn't give a damn about the fans. Why did he put this up there? Because I didn't write a rebuttal to his review. Of course, if I'd written a rebuttal to his review, people were gone, oh my God, that insensitive Peter David, he has to go and take on reviewers. So, when you engage with these people, it is a lose-lose proposition.
That's really interesting, and I think when this novel came out about a month ago, and there was some people. These aren't trolls. Some people were upset about the novel, about the way it was framed, and about the fact that I'm white. And there was a lot of people yelling at me for a couple days on Twitter, and so I got off of Twitter, and then people wrote on Twitter, Ben Winters why are you ducking out of this conversation? How dare you get off of Twitter? And I was like, in my head, I was like, the primary advantage of Twitter is that you're allowed to leave it when you want to. You know what I mean? Because I think what Peter was saying is that it becomes a lose-lose. Like if people are determined to be upset with you, they don't want to have a discussion. They want to be upset with you, and so there isn't anything you can really say, especially in a sort of scattershot public forum like that, which is, it's frustrating, but it's also like we're all really lucky to be in the position where we have this megaphone. Publishing a book is like a big, like, look what I did, and then you can't engage individually with, I don't know, it's a weird situation, you know?
In a funny way, though, as a YA writer, I quite often have like 13-year-olds say stuff that I interpret to be trolly. And then I look at their, and you know what I mean? It sounds like if an adult said it, it would be really horrible, and this would be like an irredeemable person. But then, like you look at it, and think, oh, you're 13, so you say something reasonable back, and they're like, oh, thank you, Mr. Westerfeld.
Yeah.
I understand what you mean now. I'm woke, and you're like, well, that was easy, and it's like, and it's why I like writing YA, is because, you know, like when Jack Nicholson plays an asshole, you know, A, that character's always going to be an asshole, and B, that Jack Nicholson himself is an asshole. but a 13-year-old character doing terrible things, there's hope, and so I try not to. I as a YA writer, I have a completely different relationship to trolls. Is that so many kids will just turn around very quickly and say, oh yeah, no, I see what you mean, and they don't know what they're saying is trolly necessarily, because they're not as skilled and practiced at being dickheads as adults are.
Or they'll be really rude, and then I'll block them on Twitter. Then I'll get a fan letter and say, I think you've blocked me. I feel really sorry. And then I'm like, oh, you apologize, okay. But then I don't know how to unblock people because I don't know who they are. Sorry.
Delete your account.
My favorite is
I just want to say real quick, the best take I ever saw on trolling was in the most recent Ghostbusters movie, where they're looking at the computer and seeing people bitching about ghostbusting women, and they're saying, oh my God, who are these assholes? And all I could think was, they're the guys who saw your trailer and they're commented on it. I mean, I thought that was wonderful.
I just love the ones I get that say, I hate your guts, Lord Satan, OMG, OMG, I love you, you're my favorite author.
I'm just glad you're reading my tweets. Ransom, I'm sorry, Ben, were you about to jump in? Ransom, have you had an experience with internet trolling?
I've been pretty lucky, but I sort of disengage real quickly, so it's easy for me. I'm just sort of like, okay, I won't be on the internet for a while. I have a friend who likes to say, quoting George Bernard Shaw regarding trolls, never wrestle with a pig. You get dirty, and besides, the pig likes it. That's pretty much my take on it.
Ben, I think, did you want to add something else?
A lot of people have really important and interesting things to say and things that matter, and it's hard because it all becomes a blur of comment, and you can't. It's hard to separate things that are important and interesting and need to be discussed from things that are just like, I want to punch you in the face. I hate your book. You know. Like, yeah. It's hard. It's weird that this is our public space now. This like wild, chaotic, ongoing, multi-party interaction with no filters. Like, it's hard to have any kind of important conversation, which is a stressful situation.
But enough about the Republicans.
Yeah, but it's a complicated issue because people.
Thank you. I'll be here all weekend.
People do have serious concerns, and you want to address them. But I think it's one generality I think we can all agree on is that it's always helpful if the people criticizing you have actually read the thing they're attacking, and then you weigh in on it. I thought Attica Locke. I saw her sticking up for you when you were getting a lot of heat, and somebody responded to her and said, "Well, it's bigger than this one author in this one book." And she said, "Well, why are you singling out this one author in this one book then?" Maybe there's something to be said about not zeroing in on one author and talking about an issue without attacking the one person. Let's take a question here.
Okay, so
Rock and Roll Girl.
Thank you. You asked the question that I literally wrote down an hour ago, so thank you for that. But a second caveat to it, no, that's okay. It's a good question. The second part of that, maybe Ransom Riggs can answer this a little bit more specifically. I don't want to put you on the spot, but not so much about ethnicity, but the change in characters' ages, and if you can talk a little bit about your thoughts on that, or for anybody.
You mean like why changes were made from the book to the movie?
I can't imagine what I might be referring to.
Well,
so,
here's
yeah,
the
like
thing.
why characters age.
So from the book to the movie, a number of the characters' ages were changed. Some of their powers were switched around and things. And so I didn't have a lot of input in that planning phase, and I had the same questions as you the first time I read the first draft of the script. And I had a little bit of input, and I was like, maybe we went too far over there, maybe you went too far over here. They sort of reeled a few things back, but at the end of the day, I have the advantage of having read the script and seen several cuts of the movie, whereas all the fans have only seen the trailers for Miss Peregrine. And I think once you see the movie, you will see that like all of the changes that were made to the characters' ages and powers and things are done to make it more cinematic. And in a lot, fans might not like this, but in a lot of cases, when I saw what Tim did, I was like, that's so smart, I wish I'd thought of that. But, you know, he had to take these characters and put them on screen, and there were some things that just made more sense when you're seeing a character, you know, move and act and walk around. Visually, they just click in a way where it didn't really occur to me writing the book.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, the same thing's happening with Zeros. Sony's working on it, and they're sort of teenagers with superpowers, and they're aging them up, and it doesn't really necessarily come from a narrative place. It's just because it's going to be on MTV, and they're aging up as a network. So it's amazing what sort of stakeholders can be involved in a decision like that. So, it's like MTV has decided to be older, so the characters in Zeros are being older.
I apologize that we are out of time, but we are going to. There's an autograph session in
AA09.
Autograph Area 9, number 9, like the Beatles song.
You can ask us questions there.
You feel free to ask your questions there. Get your book signed. You guys have been an awesome audience. First thing in the morning.
Thank you.
A great panel here. Let's hear it for you and for them. Thank you so much for being here.